Hello everyone, my name is Spencer Newell and I'm going to do my best to teach you the basics for UV mapping a low poly model in Blender and texturing it in Substance. In this video, I'll show you how to model, UV map, and texture a simple coin, soda can, and crate. I'll go through the entire modeling process for each object, unwrapping the UVs, and texturing using Substance Painter. All the files I use in this tutorial can be found in the description. So here we are in Blender 2.8. I'm hoping you have a little bit of familiarity with Blender as I'll be moving at a steady pace, but I'll do the best to explain each step I take along the way. So first off, an important rule for modeling is to always save often. That being said, the first thing I'm going to do is create a save for the scene. So I'm going to go up to File on the top left, I'm going to click Save As, and I'm going to click on my desktop. You can save it anywhere you want, but I'll just put that for now. I'm going to name this texturepractice.blend. I'm just going to click Save. Alright, so here we have our default scene. You should probably have a camera, a light, and a cube. But for this tutorial, we don't need the camera or the light. So I'm going to click on the camera and hold Shift and click on the light and hit X to delete them. We need to model a crate, a soda can, and a coin. For the crate, this default cube is actually an grate. So I'm going to go to Orthographic View. I'm going to click on the cube and I'm just going to move it up just a little bit. I'm just going to move it to the side, and now we're going to create our coin. So for our coin, I'm going to add a new object, a cylinder. So I'm going to hold Shift A to create a new object. I'm going to go down to Cylinder under Mesh. So right here we have a new cylinder, and this dialog box, you can click the drop down right there, and we have some options. You might know this already, but here you can change how many sides you want, the radius, and the depth. For now, I just want 32 vertices for the sides, and 1 and 2 for the depth. So here's our basic soda can. It looks a little boring right now, but we'll get into it later. For now, we're just going to move it up just a little bit, and that should be good. And last but not least, our coin. So I'm going to change the view just a little bit, move the soda can slightly to the left, and I'm going to do the same thing. Shift A to create a new cylinder, and here will be our coin. I'll leave it at 32 sides, but starting off I will shrink a little bit, so I'll go on the scale right here, and I'll just scale it down on the z-axis, and just flatten it out just a little bit, and then I'll move it back up right above the line. And with modeling, it's always a good idea to name everything, so I'm going to do just that before we start. So up here in the outliner, we have our 3 objects. I'm going to click on the coin, and I'm going to rename it by double-clicking to coin. I'm going to do the same for the soda can. I'm going to double-click it to soda can. And last but not least, I'm going to click the cube, and I'm going to rename it to crate. So now let's begin modeling our coin. So I'm going to select our coin, and a cool thing we can do is hit / on the keyboard, and it will hide everything else and make our coin the only object in the scene. And we can hit it again to show everything back. So I'm going to hit / again and hit tab to go into edit mode. You can also go up here and click edit mode. So what we really want to remember while modeling is to try and leave a lot of the geometry as simple as possible so that we can use height maps and bump maps, which I'll explain later on in Substance Painter, to capture most of the detail. So for our coin, we really just want to keep this as close to a cylinder as possible. The most I'm going to do is bevel the edges. So again, I'm going to select the top and bottom faces. I'm going to Control B. I'm going to scale it down just a little bit, and I'm going to leave it right about there. And I'm going to move up the segments to 4. And that's that. That's our coin. But in object mode, you can see it's a little bit sharp. We can still see the edges, and we do not want that. So what we can do is with the coin selected, we can right click and shade smooth. So that's all we're going to do for the coin for now. The rest of the detail will come through Substance Painter with normal maps and height maps. So all I want to do now is just bring the coin up a little bit and rotate it on the side. So I'll just drag it up and I'll rotate it. And the rotation tool is right over here. So if I hold Control and I grab one of these axes, you'll have snapping points. So I want to snap it to about where it's 90 degrees. I'll double check it, that looks good. And we are set to go. So now I can hit / and we can start working on the next object. Alright, let's start working on the soda can now. So before we continue, let's always remember to save. So I can either hit Control S to save, or I can go to File at the top left and hit Save. So I'm going to select the soda can and hit / to isolate it. All I want to do with the soda can is scale it up on the Z-axis. So I'm going to go to the Scale tool. I'm going to select the Z-axis and just drag it up a little bit, about there, and I want to bring it up right above the axis line. Alright, again, we're going to have a scaling issue, so we need to rescale it, so everything's 1. So in order to do that, with the soda can selected, go to Object, in Object mode, Object, and Apply Scale. Alright, so I'm now going to go into Edit mode, Face Select tool selected, I'm going to select the top and bottom, and I want to bevel it again. So Control B to bevel. I'm going to bring it down just a little bit, and with the scroll wheel, you can also change the segments. Let's do 4 again, right about there. And if you don't have a scroll wheel, you can always go here and change the segments right here. Again, let's do 4. So soda cans usually have a little room at the top. So in order to get that, I'm going to go with my face tool. I'm going to select the top face, and I'm going to hold Control+, and this just extends the selection range. You can also hit Control- to deselect it. But I want about that much, and then I can hit X to delete, and I want to delete the faces. So now we have an open hole at the top. So with Edge Select, we can add a little rim. So I'm going to, while holding Alt, I can click on the edge, and it'll select the entire rim. Alright, so now I want to extrude it up a little bit. So I want to go over here and make sure I got extrude region selected. And then I could grab that extrude and bring it up just a little bit, right about there. And we still have an open hole, and we need to fill it. So with our keyboard, we can hit F to fill it. That'll just fill in all the vertices. So now I want to hit I on my keyboard for inset. I can I and bring it in just a little bit. And I want to do it one more time. I and inset just a little bit. And then I want to move that face down. And now we have this little rim feature. And for the soda can, that's all I want to do. But again, we have some sharp edges, so I want to smooth it. So with the can selected in object mode, I'm going to shade smooth by right-clicking. But as you can see, we have some shading issues. It looks a little too smooth in some places, and I want to fix that. So on the right, on this toolbar, there's this button called Object Data Properties. It's like an upside-down triangle. Let's click it, and under the Normals tab, there's this thing called Auto Smooth. Let's click that, and it looks a lot better. So Auto Smooth with this angle, the lower it is, the more detail we have, the sharper it gets, and the higher it is, the smoother it gets. We have less detail, but I want to keep it around 30 degrees. Okay, so our soda can is done for now. So I can hit / again to bring everything back. And now let's start working on the cube. But again, let's save before we continue by hitting Control S or File Save. Alright, I'll select the cube and / to isolate. Now let's begin on this. Alright, for the cube, we're going to keep this pretty simple too. But let's start. So tab, go into edit mode, and with face select, we're going to make sure we can hit A to select everything. And now I want to add in a little inset. So I can hit I, but we can't inset anything. We got to hit I one more time, so twice. So we have individual sides now. So let's scale it down about there. And now I want to extrude them in a little bit. But if we extrude them with normal extrude region, we're going to get something we don't want. So I'm going to Control Z that, make sure you Control Z, otherwise there will be an extrude there. And I'm going to go back to extrude, hold it down, and go to extrude along normals. So now when we extrude, it'll extrude in on along the normals. Alright, for this cube, I want to add a little bit more detail. So I'm going to go back to Select Tool, and I want to select 4 of these sides, all around the sides. And with them selected, I want to hold Shift D to duplicate, and I don't want to click it. I want to hit right click so it snaps back into place. Whenever you right click something, it'll always snap back to where it was. And with those faces still selected, I want to right click and hit separate. Separate by selection. So now if I go into object mode, I will have two separate objects. I'm going to hit Control Z so it goes back to where it was. All right. So now I want to select those cubes in the middle. I'm going to hit / to re-show everything and / one more time to isolate. So now I have these 4 planes. All right, so with these 4 planes, I want to turn them into diagonal pieces of wood. So in order to do that, I'm going to select the 4 planes, hit Tab to go into edit mode, and up here, I want to go select the vertices selection. So I'm going to select diagonal vertices on this. So I'm going to click on the top left one on one plane and hold shift and click on the bottom right. So with them both selected, I want to hit J for join. That'll create an edge between 2 vertices. I want to do that on all planes. So I'm going to click, hold shift, and on the bottom right, click again and hit J to join. I'm going to do that on the other 2. Click, shift, click, J for join, and one more time. Alright, so now we have 4 diagonal edges. I'm going to go to my edge select tool and click on those 4 edges we created by holding shift. I can select all of them, and now I want to bevel them. So I'm going to click on the bevel tool. I'm going to bring them in just a little bit, and right about there should be good. I just want to create like a little diagonal piece of wood, and let's keep it at 1 segment, and that should be good. So now I want to go to the face select tool, select those little faces, little pieces we created, and with them all selected, I want to hit Control I to invert our selection. And now I can hit X to delete the faces, and now we have 4 little pieces of wood. But there's more I want to do. So let's go back to our scene. So we can hit / to show everything. Right now, with our cube selected, the pieces of wood are kind of inside of it. We don't want that. So let's select the pieces of wood. It'll be a little tricky. There we go. Let's go to a side we can see. And with the wood selected, we can scale it up just a little bit, right to the point where you can see the edges are being covered up. Right about there. All right. So, looks a little bit better, but they're a little thin. We want a little more detail. So I'm going to hit / again, and I want to hit Tab to go into edit mode, and I'm going to A to select everything. So I'm going to go again and hit extrude along normals, and if you don't have that selected, just hold it and extrude along normals. And I'm going to drag that inwards, not outwards, but inwards just a little bit, right about there. All right. So I'm going to go back to object mode and / to show everything. So now we have a little wood pattern, but there's something we can do to optimize this. So we have these 4 pieces, these 4 logs, diagonal pieces, whatever you want to call them. But if we click on them and I isolate them one more time, you can see we have some faces that are going to be not seen by anyone. So go into edit mode with our face select. We're going to select all these faces, the side ones too. Let's just show you. Go unisolate them, and we can't see any of our selection. That means they're hidden. So I'm going to select all of them, just one by one. It can be a little tedious. All right, we'll double check we have all the ones we want selected. Perfect, and let's hit X to delete, and we're going to delete the faces. So now we have some mesh that is a lot more optimized. And if we go / one more time, everything looks the same. All right. And that is all we're going to do for the cube. So now that we're done with our models, we can start focusing on texturing. But before we can even start texturing, we have one more step, which is UV mapping or UV unwrapping. So understanding UV mapping and UV unwrapping is an essential part of texturing because your 2D textured images need to know where to go and be placed on your 3D models. So take this cube. How does the 2D texture know which face to go on? We need to unwrap the cube in order to fit the textures around it like this. So how do we unwrap? So back in Blender, in my default scene, I want to unwrap this cube. So in order to unwrap it, I need to first be in edit mode. So I'm going to click on my object and hit Tab to go in edit mode. I need to then select all the faces by pressing A, and then hit U to unwrap it. So here in the UV mapping dialog box, we have a couple of options. The only one we're going to be focusing on is unwrap. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and well, nothing happens. That's because we need to be in the UV editing tab, which is up here at the top. I'm going to go ahead and click it, and we have a new window, which is the UV editor. So in the UV editor window, we have our texture and our UV islands that we unwrapped from our 3D mesh. Yet all you are seeing at the moment is probably a big yellow square. That's because we haven't imported a texture, and every face of our unwrapped mesh is overlapping one another, which will ultimately provide an undesired result in most cases. In order to fix this, let's first create a new material to better visualize what's going on. So I'll go to the top once more, and this time click on the Shading tab. This will open the node editor where we can construct our material. In this example, I just want a basic checkered pattern to help us visualize what's going on. Blender makes that pretty easy. So I'll just go down here where it says new, and I'll click it. And here will be a node that'll help us create our texture. So I'll go back in the background and hold Shift A to create a new node. And I'll go down to texture and image texture. So now we have a new image texture node. I'll click it. Now we need to click a new on the image texture node to create a new texture. Alright, so under generated type, I want to click the drop down and select UV grid. Hit OK. So nodes are kind of like Legos, they need to be connected. But all I'm going to do in this case is drag the color dot to the base color dot. And as you can see, we have a checkered texture. So I'm going to go back to the UV editing tab, and you can see the texture is applied. In some cases, you might not see it yet. So you need to go up here and select the material viewport. So now that I have a texture to help us see what's going on, at first glance, everything looks fine. But when I go to UVs by selecting everything, and I hit G to grab, you'll notice on the right that everything is mirrored. When I grab everything, it's all moving together. In some cases, that's fine, but in our case, that's not what we want. So essentially, if I paint a smiley face on the left here, every face will have a smiley face. Again, that's not what we want. So what do? Well, I need to start selecting some seams that I want to help in the wrapping process. So how do we do that? So I'll go to the Edge Select tool up here in Edit mode, and I'm just going to click some edges that I think I want to help in the unwrapping process. So I'll just click some of these. This step takes some time and some trial and error, as it's sometimes hard to visualize what a cube or another object looks like flat. So I'll just select some of these, and I think we'll try that right now. So I'm going to right click and click Mark Seam. And when they're marked, they turn a little bit red on the edges. So if you mark a seam accidentally that you don't want, say I'll mark this one, and I don't want a seam there, I can click it and right click and clear seam. Alright, so now that we marked some seams, we need to unwrap the cube once more. In edit mode, I'll hit A to select everything, I'll hit U to unwrap, and I'll click unwrap once more. And in the UV editor window, you can already see a much better outcome. We now have flattened the cube and made it so each surface shares its own unique space. So what do we even do with this? Well, let me give you a quick example. I can export this UV map by going up to UV up here, clicking it, and I can click Export UV Layout. I can then save the PNG file. I'll just say test UV map. And I can save it to my desktop by clicking here. And I'll just export UV layout. So now I can go to any image editing software and edit it. I'm going to use Photoshop for this, but this can be done in any other image editing software. I've imported the UV map we just exported. I'm going to paint some super simple textures on this 1024 by 1024 canvas. So I want to create a new layer, as I'm just going to use this UV map we imported as a template. So I'll go over here and click a new layer, and I just want to paint some super simple details. So I'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and let's do a smiley face. Alright, so now I want to export this, but I don't want to export the map, as the map will be visible, so I'll just go ahead and hide it. Alright, so let's export this image and see how it looks. So back in Blender, I want to import that texture we just created. In order to do that, we need to create another material. So I'm going to go to the Shading tab once more, and I want to, let's just overwrite this material. We don't need it anymore. So I'm going to click on this and delete. And I want to create another one. So Shift A, texture, and we want an image texture once more. Instead of a new, we want to open a file. I'm going to go to my desktop where I saved it. I'm going to find it, and then I'm going to open it. Again, we need to drag the color dot to the base color dot. And as you can see, our texture is now in Blender. So now let's go see what's going on with the UVs. So if I go to the UV editing tab and I click it, I want to see our texture here as well. So we have to go to the file button up here and click open. And let's go look for that texture on our desktop once more. I'm going to open it. And now you can see our texture. So here you get a better idea of what's going on. Each one of these boxes on our UV is a face on our actual mesh. So if I were to go to the face select tool and grab one of these boxes, you can see how it directly affects our texture on the right. UV unwrapping can be a tedious and tricky process, as you will often be faced with something much more harder than a cube. Just remember that UV unwrapping is like taking a 3D object and trying to find the best way to flatten it out so you can paint on it without warping or stretching. We can also use seams to better unwrap our mesh to essentially cut into smaller pieces that are easy to flatten out and texture. Now, just like our cube, we need to unwrap each of our objects in order to texture them later on using Substance Painter. So let's start off with our coin. I'm going to go to it, click it, and hit / to isolate it, and then I'm going to tab to go in edit mode. So, how do we unwrap this? Well, there's pretty much 3 main pieces to this coin. We got 2 faces, and a big cylinder that goes around the side. So, let's go to Edge Select, and I want to unwrap the faces first. Well, let's mark the seams at least. Alright, so I'm going to hit Alt and click for an edge loop there, and then I'm going to mark a seam there. So now, when we unwrap this, this circle should be flat. I'm going to do the same for the other side. Mark seam, and there we go. But now we have this big cylinder. Since, just like a circle, there's no ending edge, it's going to look a little weird when we unwrap it. Let's try doing that now. So I'm going to A to select everything, put on face mode, and hit U to unwrap. I'm going to go to the UV editing tab and see what happens. So here is our edge. Here's our 2 faces, but our edge, our cylinder looks a little weird. It looks like a circle, and we don't want that. That'll be kind of hard to texture. Well, how do we fix that? So I'm going to go back to the modeling tab and click it. And in order to fix that, we need to cut the circle or the cylinder. So I'm going to click on the seam here, and I want to mark to the point where this other seam starts. So we have a nice clean cut. And I want to mark seam again by right-clicking and mark seam. And now let's try unwrapping it again. So I need to be in face select mode, hit A to select everything, U, and unwrap. Now let's see what happens. So UV editing tab, and now you can see our cylinder is one big rectangle. Looks a lot better. That's going to be a lot easier to texture. But everything's a little tiny. So how do we fix that? So up here, if I click UV, we can pack our UVs. So I'm going to click Pack Islands. And that looks a lot better, but things are a little close together. If things are overlapping, your textures are going to overlap. So say I have a big face of George Washington here, you might have George Washington's face align over here if they are overlapping. So I just want to change the margin just a little bit bigger, right about there. And in some cases, you can have these UV islands be a little bit bigger than they actually are over here. So say I want more detail here, well, I can make these a little bit bigger. So I can hover over it and hit L to select it, and do the same for the other one, L, and I want to scale these up. So I'm going to hit G to grab and move it up, and then I want to grab the scale button right here. I just want to bring them up just a little bit, but things are a little wonky again. Things are overlapping, so we need to pack them again. So I'm going to A to select everything, go to the UV up here, and then pack them once more. All right. This should be all we need to do to unwrap our coin. All right, so now that we're done with our coin, let's start working on our soda can. So I want to go back to the modeling tab, click it, and we're in edit mode. I need to go to object mode by hitting tab, and hit / to bring everything back. Let's click on our can, and / to isolate it. So, UV unwrapping this, we have another big cylinder. It's kind of like our coin, just stretched out. We have a face here, and a big cylinder. We have a little extra work to do up here with this rim, but that should be easy. So, for texturing, we also need to figure out where we want our seams to be for, say, different materials. So we want like a big metal base, and maybe we want some like red stripes to mark off where the label stops. So that's one extra thing we need to consider. But again, this should be pretty easy. I'm going to go to the edge select mode. Let's mark off the bottom face first. I want the texture to probably start right around here. So I'll click on that edge loop by alt click. I'm going to right click and mark seam. And now we need to figure out where the top needs to start. So I want this to be a big metal rim, but I want our label to start down here. So I think this edge loop right here would be a good border. So I'm going to mark it, right click, and mark seam. So now we have our big face up here. We have a pretty sharp edge right here, and if we flatten it out, it might warp. So I'm going to mark this edge loop right here, and I'm going to mark the seam. Everything else should flatten out pretty fine. There'll be a little bit of stretching, but not much. A little bit of stretching is okay most of the time, but if you have any sharp points like this, you are better off unwrapping them. Alright, so our cylinder. Again, if we unwrap this, we're going to get a weird circle like last time, so we need to break the circle. So I'm going to select this entire edge here by alt-clicking, and now we should have a good seam. But if we have a flat edge like this, say like our flat face, and we have a line going through it, it's going to cut and make a little cut mark in it. So what I can do is hold shift and left click, and I can unselect them. And everything else should be fine. But again, the bottom, I don't want to cut here. So I'm going to hold shift, click, click, click while holding shift. All right, so now we have our seam, but I need to make a seam. So right click, mark seam. That should be everything we need to do for our can. Let's see how it looks. I'm going to go to face select mode, hit A, U, and unwrap. Let's go to the UV editing tab. All right, so it looks really good. Let's try packing it. So we can hit A to select everything in there, UV, and pack islands. And everything looks already pretty good, and that should be good to go. Alright, so now we have to unwrap the crate. So let's go to the modeling tab. I'm going to tab to go into object mode and / to unisolate. So with our crate, we still have two objects. We have the cube and our planks. So with the planks, we don't need to mark any seams, because if you think about it, we just have this weird U pattern, but we can flatten that out to be a perfect flat shape with no seams. So these are actually already done. So I'm going to hit / and click on the cube and hit / once more to isolate. So it's going to be just like the cube we saw earlier, with just a few extra steps. So if I hit tab and I click edge select, I actually want to select all of these square edges all the way around. It's going to take an extra second. Sometimes it's tedious work. And double check we have them all. Alright, mark seam. So if I unwrap this now by going to the face select, A, U, and unwrap, in the UV editing tab, we can see that all these islands are a little bit skewed. So how do we fix that? Well, let's go to the modeling tab. So what's going on is if with face select, if I select this edge by holding alt and click on the corner, you can see that we're trying to hide all this detail in this little area. So it's kind of skewing. So we need to introduce another seam. So click edge select. I'm going to mark a seam all the way around this edge. I'm going to do that all around too. So if I hold shift alt, I can select multiple, shift alt, and then top and bottom. I'm going to mark a seam. Let's check that now. So face select, A, U, and unwrap. UV editing tab, and it looks a lot better, but we still got some skewing. So what's going on again is if I go to the modeling tab, we're still having an issue with this. So we're trying to make this flat, but these edges are holding it together. It's like you're trying to step on a box. So in order to fix that, I want to click on the edge select. I can click on this edge, and I can hit Control Alt, and we click this one, and we select the all these edges all the way around. It's called an edge ring. Again, we can do this as well. So Control Alt, Control Shift Alt to get them all. Control Shift Alt, Control Shift Alt. I'm going to do the bottom as well, and the top. And to double check we have them all, we can do mark, seam, and then we go to the wireframe mode, which is up here. And then we can see that we got them all. Yep, perfect. And we go back to normal shading. And so let's check the unwrap now. So we go to the face select, A, U, and unwrap. And then UV editing, and well, that looks a lot better. So we still need to join our planks with this map. In order to do that, let's go back to modeling. I'm going to tab into object mode. I'm going to hit / to show everything. So now I want to join these planks with this cube. In order to do that, I'm going to select the planks and then hold shift to select the cube, right click, and hit join, which is also Control J. So now we have one object. Make sure everything's still named perfectly, and let's do the final unwrap for this. So if I hit tab, A to select everything, now we have the planks. Let's go to the UV editing. And the planks are a little bit, well, it's not good. So we need to unwrap it one more time. So we can either right click over here and unwrap, or we can do it over here. I'm just going to right click and unwrap. Alright, so we're almost done, but these islands are pretty spaced far apart, and we need them to be a little more packed together so we can get more detail. So in order to do that, I can select everything by hitting A, and I'm going to go to UV, and I want to click Pack Islands. And there we go, and I want to change the margin down to a smaller number, something where they're touching pretty close but not overlapping, right about there, and we are done with our crate. Alright, so we're nearly done, just a few more steps. Let's go to the modeling tab. I want to tab to go into object mode, and we need to see if anything's inside out, because if it's inside out, it'll be invisible when we texture it, which will kind of suck. So, in order to see if things are inside out, we can select A for everything. Let's go to the overlay drop-down box, which is up here. I want to click the drop-down, and right here you'll see face orientation. Let's click that. So we're seeing blue and red. What the blue means, it's right side up. You'll be able to see the textures and everything will be good. But if it's red, it's actually inside out and it will be invisible. So how do we fix that? So the planks on our cube are, well, inside out. That means we have a negative scale. So if I click it and I hit tab, I can flip these faces the other way around. How do we do that? Let's click mesh, normals, and recalculate outside. That just checks everything. And now everything's blue and right side up. So we're nearly ready to export, but one last step. Let's turn off the face orientation, and let's double check, make sure everything is scaled with 111. So the coin, perfect. Soda can, perfect. I'm looking right here. And the crate, 111, perfect. If your object is not 111, you can rescale it. So click on the object, go to object and object mode up here, and apply scale. If you do that, and it's not 111, you will need to UV unmap it. Otherwise, your textures will be slightly scaled differently. Last but not least, I want to apply a separate material to each of these objects. That'll just make it easier in Substance Painter. So for the coin, I want to go down here, click on the coin, and over here, there will be this little sphere called Material Properties. Let's click that, and let's make a new material. So I'll click New, and I want to rename this to Coin. So I'll double click it and call it Coin. I'll do the same thing for the soda can. New, and we can call it Soda. And last but not least, the crate. New, and we can call it Crate. Perfect. Alright, well we're finally ready to export these to Substance Painter. So let's select everything with A. I'm going to go up here to File, Export. Now I want to export these as FBX. In here, I just want to rename it to Texture Practice Mesh, something simple like that. And I'll just save it to my desktop. But before we do, go over here and make sure Mesh is selected. All you gotta do is click on it, and up here make sure Selected Objects is selected. That way we only export what we have selected in the scene. And when we're done, we can hit Export FBX, and we're ready to move on to Substance Painter. Alright, so now we're in Substance Painter, and you can start texturing, which is honestly my favorite part. So in order to get started, I'm just going to close a few dialog boxes. Just no on this guy and close this one. And we need to import our model. So I'm going to go to File, New. I'm going to click Select next to File, and we need to find our file, which in this case is an FBX. I'm going to click it, hit Open, and the only thing we might need to change on this dialog box is the document resolution. 1024 is perfect, but you can go higher and lower. This will affect the detail of your image. So 1024 and click OK. So just like in Blender, there's a couple unique ways to move around in Substance Painter. So for instance, if I hold Alt and left mouse button, I could rotate my objects. Alt and middle mouse, I can pan. And Alt and right mouse click, I can zoom in and out. I can also change the direction of the light. So if I hold shift and right click, I can change the orientation of the light. You can also see we have a lot of different windows and a lot of cool things going on. Like down here, we have a bunch of different cool materials. We have brushes, alphas, a whole bunch we'll go through later on. There's also a bunch of different windows, and these windows you can drag and put anywhere you want. But for now, I'll just leave it where it's at. Now let me explain some of these windows. I'll grab this guy, the display settings window. And well, this controls the camera, the environment, and the shading. You can change the environmental rotation, the lighting, the blur, a lot of other cool details we can get on later on. I'll put that back. Now over here, we have the layers panel. This is a lot like Photoshop system. So we can create multiple layers, we can create masks. There's a lot of cool things we can do here, and this is how we're going to distinguish some detail and do a lot of cool things. But for now, I'll just put this back. So down here, this window, the texture settings window, is a little bit of a tricky window, but it's very important. This is the window where the resolution, channels, and associated mesh maps can be managed. Again, we'll get into this soon. Another super important panel is the properties panel, where we control our brushes, the size, and if I can grab it, control color, height, we can control just about everything here. And we'll be using this a bunch, but for now, I'll scale it down just a little bit and I'll put it back and we'll continue. Down here is our shelf. It's like a big library of all our materials, our alphas, our brushes. We'll be here a lot, but we'll also try to import and export and create some of our own things for the shelf as well. It also has a super handy search feature, so if I want to find, say, dirt, and I turn off the filter, it should find all the dirt-related objects in here. So there's lots of different things, dirt materials, dirt grunge maps, brushes, a super handy feature as well. Up here, we have a couple of brush settings we can use, which is the size, the flow, the opacity, spacing, and a couple of different mirroring options we'll be using as well. There's also hotkeys like you can hit Control and the scroll wheel. You can change the brush size, you can change the flow, the opacity, all this with Control and moving the mouse around. And up here we have some more helpful tools. Our brush, eraser, a projecting tool, polygon fill, smear. There's a lot of other helpful things we'll be using. But for now, let's continue on with actual models. Before we can start messing with our materials, we need to bake our mesh maps. Baking refers to the action of transferring mesh-based information into textures. This information is then read by shaders or substance filters to perform advanced effects. So how do we bake our mesh maps? Well, in the texture set settings, we can click Bake Mesh Maps. So in here, we are going to be baking all these maps, the normal world space, ID, ambient occlusion, and so on. There's a lot of different settings and things to tweak around, but for this tutorial, we won't be messing with much of it. These maps do some crazy things, and they each play a specific role. You can get lots of cool effects, say jagged rocks, raised bolts for a robot, or smeared handprints on a window. All of this done with only textures and not affecting the original mesh. So now we're going to bake all the maps for our materials. And in order to do that, we're just going to go over here, and under normals, we're just going to click this one button, use low poly mesh as high poly. Now, you don't need to know what that does right now, and we can get into detail, but basically, this is a cool way to bake on, like I say, high poly bevels onto a low poly object, just to give them an illusion of extra detail. But again, for now, we'll just click this button to leave as is. The only other thing we're going to change is under the ID. So we're going to click this button right here, and we're going to select Mesh ID and Polygroup. And under Color Generator, we're going to select Random. Finally, up here, we're going to Apply to All. And now we can bake our textures. So we're going to click Bake All Textures and watch it do its work. So now all our maps are baked, and if you look at the bottom left, you can see all our maps have their specific textures assigned. Alright, well now we can finally start texturing. You remember those materials we made in Blender, the coin material, soda, and crate? Well, they're here in Substance too. So if we look for this texture set list button, we can see them here. And the reason we did that is because it makes it a lot easier in Substance to texture. We can hide other things based on texture and show them. So for now, I only wanted to texture the coin. Let's start with that. I'll hide the other ones, and we can start with the coin. So since we have the coin material selected, if I close out of that, this entire layer group is specific to the coin now. So I'm just going to delete these layers, and we'll start fresh from here. So real quick, I'm going to hit File, and Save, and then I'm going to go to the layer group and create a new folder. It's always good to name your folders, but I'm just going to call this Base Coin Color. So now we can assign whatever material we want to this. So we can make it a cool gold, just drag it in there. Or we could do, I don't know, say plastic. Ooh, that looks kind of funky. But for this one, let's create our own material. So in order to do that, up here, there's this little paint can. It's called Add Fill Layer. I'm going to click it, and then I'm going to drag it into this folder. So for this, a fill layer is exactly what it sounds like. It fills over everything. So let's give it a gold texture. I'm going to go try and find a yellow thing down here in the properties under color. I'm going to click base color. Nope, not base color, the box. And I'm going to try and find a yellow color. Probably something around there. And then I can go down to roughness. I can make it pretty glossy by bringing it down. And then under metallic, I want to bring it closer to 1. There's a range between 0 and 1 between all these. So the higher it gets, the more metallic it becomes. So a nice gold. We can make it a little less metallic, and I think it looks pretty good right there. So our coin's looking a little boring, so let's add some detail to it. One way we can do that is with height maps. So let's do just that. I'll create a new folder. I'll drag to the top. I'm going to call this, let's say, Edge Detail. I'm going to click another fill layer. I'm going to drag it into that folder. And then I'm going to adjust some properties. So I don't want any color for this. So right here, I can turn these off. So no color. I don't want roughness, metal. I only want height and normal selected. So to start out, I want some bumps around the edge. You know, like the coins have. So let's create some bumps. So down here with height, this is a cool feature we'll explore a little bit, but for now I'll just drag it a little bit up and we'll see what that does. So now what I'm going to do is with my fill layer and my edge detail, I'm going to create a mask for this. So I'm going to right click it and add a black mask. A black mask means everything's transparent and a white mask means everything's visible. So when I black, I can paint on some detail. So I want to make sure I select the black part right here, the mask, and make sure my paintbrush is selected. And now, if I paint on it, you might be able to see some detail being added. You know, some weird lines or whatever. And this is kind of the effect we're going for. Again, this isn't affecting the mesh. This is this all texture work. It's giving you the illusion that there's a difference in height. So I don't want this organic style. I want to use a brush or an alpha specifically. So what I can do is go to the mask up here, click it, right click it, and I could clear the mask. Now it's all back to the way it was. So since I want to use alphas, let me explain them. Alphas work on the alpha channel. Remember that black is transparent and white is full visibility. So depending on our height, we will see detail based on the grayscale colors in our alpha choice. A lot of these alphas I made myself or purchased, but I will also show you how to install them on your own. So let's click, I don't know, let's click this arrow, there we go. If I have the mask selected and the paintbrush tool selected, I can click any alpha, say the arrow, and it'll show up down here in my properties. So now, if I go to my coin and I click, I can paint with alphas, which adds a lot better detail than I can probably paint by hand. Again, I could do a plus sign and some more arrows. So now I have all the extra detail, super simple. And if I want to change the height, I can click next to the mask, my fill layer, and I could change that height inward, outward, or even barely visible. I can also change the roughness of this too, so things are super shiny on top. I could change the color. I could do a lot of things, and all on the texture, no mesh. Alright, back to this edge. So first, I don't want any of this detail. I want to clear it once more time. So I'll click on the mask and clear mask. So I want to go back to the edge detail. But say you don't have any alphas. Let me show you how to install some. Substance Painter makes it super easy to import extra assets. All you need to do is simply drag in your image or Painter-supported files directly into your shelf. So here I have some alphas and a texture I want to use for the work we're going to do. These are all in the description below in a GitHub link. So I'm just going to drag everything into the shelf. So I'm going to move this aside and we have a new window. In this window, it's asking us where these assets go and what do they do. So over here, where it says undefined, it doesn't know what it is. So we want this one to be alpha. I named all these with alpha or texture. So this one's an alpha, this one's a texture, alpha, and these are all alphas. But down here it's asking us where do they need to go. So here it says current session, project, or shelf. Shelf means it'll be in your substance every time you open it up. Current means if I were to start a new session, it wouldn't be there unless I import it again. And that's what we want to do in this case. So I'm going to click that and import. So now all those are in our shelf. Again, only in this session. If I were to open up a new substance, it would not be there. So now that we have our imported alphas and texture, I want to start painting the edges on this. So some of the alphas we imported are going to help us out with that. So I'm going to go to the search bar and look for shape, lines, and I want this guy right here. So with my paintbrush selected, I'm going to click on the black mask under edge detail, and I'm going to click on this, and now we have a new alpha. So what I want to do is just put a rim all the way around this to add some bump detail. But when I do it this way, it looks kind of janky and it's not very accurate. So there is a way to fix that. So I'm going to Control Z that real quick. And on my keyboard, if I press F1, F2, or F3, I'll have different viewports. So I'm going to press F1. So here is my 3D model, and here is my UV map. This is what we did in Blender, and this is what we're painting on. So over here, if I press F3, I'll have the full window here. I'm going to drag this down just a little bit. So now I can paint directly on this, and I'll have the same effect. So F1, if I paint on here, it'll be the same thing. So this is going to make it a little bit easier to paint this edge, because I could click right here and hold shift and get a line, but it looks like a solid line. I'm missing some detail, so I'm going to Control Z that. So what I need to do is change the spacing on this. So when I change the spacing, I'll say 94. Let's try that. If I click and hold shift, they'll be spaced out more. We still have a little bit of gap between them, so let's try a different number. So I'm going to Control Z that real quick, and let's do 92. So when I click and I hold shift, I have a line, and if I hold Control, it'll snap. So I want to put it right about there, and let's see how that looks. So we'll go to F1, and it looks like a bump corner, but I want it to be a little bit wider. So I'm going to Control Z that again, make this a little bit bigger, go to my F3, and let's try it with a little bit bigger. So click, shift, and paint. Alright, so we have another problem. You see we're getting some lines over here that we don't want. And if we go to our F1, we can see it wraps around the corner. That's cool and all, but that's not what we want. So the reason we're getting that is if you go down to the properties, right here in alignment, we have tangent wrap on. So when I paint it here, it's wrapping around whatever's next to it. So it's doing it in 3D space. And I don't want that. So if I click this box and I select UV, it's only going to paint in the UV. So let's try that one more time. Control Z, and there we go. And if I move my brush around, you'll notice it's changing size. And I don't want that either. So right here next to size space, it's set to object. I want it set to texture. And now when I move around, it stays the same size. So let's try painting that again. So I'll click, I'll hold shift, and then I'll hit Control, and then I'll paint that line. There we go. So now it's not wrapping over, and it looks a lot better. Again, we have a little bit of spacing. I'll fix that real quick. We'll do, say, 90. Click, shift, Control, and paint. All right, there we go. It looks a lot better. So now that we have an edge, we can go back and edit it. So if I click on edge detail on my fill layer, not the mask, I can go back and change the height to outward, inward, all in between. I can add color again, and roughness and so on. But I think right about here will be good. Let's zoom in for a better look, and that looks okay. Perfect. So now I want to add a logo on the front, and I also want to add a rim on the front. So in order to do that, I'm also going to create another fill layer. So I'll create a new folder first. I'm going to drag it to the top. I'm going to call this Edge Rim Detail. And I want a new fill layer. So I'll click the fill layer, and I'll drag it inside, and it fills over everything. There's also an order of operations to this. So if I drag this entire folder with this fill layer to the bottom, you won't even notice it, because whatever's on top is going to be applied last, and whatever is on bottom is going to be applied first. So we applied this fill layer, and then we applied the color after. So it's overriding it. So I'm going to move it back to the top, and I want to open it and go to the fill layer. And again, I don't want color, roughness, metal. I want height and normal. I'm going to bring up the height just a little bit, and then I'm going to add another black mask. So now I want to add a rim on the front and the back. So with my edge rim detail selected and the mask selected, I want to search for a new alpha. So shape, and I want this guy right here, which is shape paraboloid. So I'll click it, and it looks a little softer on the edges, but this specific alpha, along with other ones, is customizable. So if I go down here into the properties, I'll drag it a little bit bigger, and attributes and parameters. So under parameters, I can change the hardness of this. So now it's solder on the edges, and again, softer, it's soft. So I want it all the way to 1, and what I want to do now is if I hold Alt and Shift, it'll snap, so I can get around easy like that. Again, you can also paint directly into the UVs, and we are still in UV alignment mode, so let's do that actually. So I want to put in a little inset. So real quick, I'm going to go back to my fill layer. I'm going to bring the height down actually. I want to go inwards. So I'm going to go back to my black mask, and then go down here and try painting it. So right about there. It's probably too small, so I can change the size of this manually too. So let's say 32. Let's do 35. There you go. All right. So I'll snap it there, I'll paint it, and we have a little rim feature, but not on the other side. There's a quicker way to do this. So I'm going to Control Z that, and I'm going to click this button right here. This is the symmetry button. So if I click it, you'll see a little red line. Maybe I make my brush a little bit smaller so you can see. But this is the line of symmetry. So if I paint somewhere here, it'll mirror to the other side. Again, there's some settings to this. I can change the axis. I can adjust the offset. Go back to 0. And yes, so I'm going to turn it back on. I'm going to bring it back up to 35. And then I'm going to paint it right there. And then as you can see, which if I zoom down, it mirrors to the other side. So perfect, that's what I want. I'll turn symmetry back off, and I'll go back to my fill layer and adjust the height just a little bit more. I can bring inwards and make it a little bit sharper. Alright, so now I want a logo for a coin, like a big star. That seems what a lot of games have now, is a big star on it. So I'm going to minimize these folders, and I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to drag to the top, and I'm going to call this coin logo. Again, I'm going to create a new fill layer. This is going to be a common practice. Drag it into the coin logo. And again, don't want color, roughness, metal. I want height and normal. I want this one to be raised a little bit. And then I'm going to search for new alpha. But first, I need to add a black mask. All right, make sure your mask is selected. And now I want to look for star. And the star I want is star 5 branch. There we go. That's the one I want. And now we can put that right there. Again, I'm going to turn the symmetry back on. Make it a little bit smaller than that. So let's do 30. And right in the middle. And we can also go back to the fill layer and bring up the height even more. And now we got some extra detail. Perfect. And that's all I want to do for the coin. Again, you can play with this and even change out the material. So I went back to the base coin color. I could turn it off. And I go to materials. And you should have a bunch of preset materials to play around with. So let's try, I don't know, let's go to smart materials. Smart materials take a little bit extra of the information. So say our curvature, ambient occlusion, it's going to look at that. And let's pick one with a couple bits of detail. Let's do copper worn right there. So if I click it now, it's going to look completely different. And if I select another one, let's say icy, it's going to look like a solid ice puck. But for this case, I just want the gold. I think that'll be perfect. So now that our coin's done, let's start working on the soda can. So up here, if I click on that button again, which is texture set list, I could hide the coin and show the soda can. I need to click on the soda can to bring up its layer hierarchy. So I'll exit out of that and I'll have a whole new layer. So I'm going to create a new folder, delete this basic layer, and I'm going to rename this to soda can base. So soda cans, their base, if you look at them, kind of like a brushed aluminum material. So I want to go look for that. So under materials, I'm going to look around for iron, some kind of brushed iron. And there should be one, which is right here, iron brushed, perfect. So I'm going to drag that right into that folder. And now we have some kind of brushed iron, but I want it to go the other way. So how do we change the rotation of this material? Luckily, there's an easy way to do it. So if I click on iron brushed, and down here in the properties, there's a rotation option. And I just want it to go 90 degrees. So in this box, just hit 90 and it'll rotate. Perfect. So there's also some features with some of these materials. We can change the roughness on specifically this guy, and we can also change the scale, the intensity. I'm just going to bring the intensity down just a little bit. And you can also change the direction here. So now that we have our base, I want to add the iconic soda can top to this, like the pop lid, maybe some circles around it, and some text. So first off, I'm going to drag this iron brush into the base layer, minimize that, and create a new folder. Drag it to the top, and I want to call this cap detail. I'm going to create a new fill layer, drag it inside that, turn off color, roughness, metal, and I'll leave height. Let's bring it in a little bit actually, just so we can see what's going on. Create a black mask for this, and I want to select a new alpha. So I'm going to go back to my shelf and search bar. I'm going to type in soda or lid. Oh, we got to close out a material. I want to search for everything. So soda and soda lid right here. So I'll select that. And there we go, we got an alpha. I'm going to turn symmetry off because I don't want that being there. And go to the top, just zoom in just a little bit, and I'll put it probably right about there. Alright, and we go back to the fill layer, maybe bring it in just a little bit more. Let's see what it looks like on top too. You can mess around with that. I'll leave it inwards a little bit. There you go. And now I want to add a little bit more detail. So I'm going to go up here to cap detail, add another fill layer, and another black mask. And in the fill layer, I'm going to again turn off color, roughness, and metal. I'm going to click on the mask, and I'm going to search for circle. Right here, circle O2 alpha. So I'm going to click that, and I'm going to go into my UV. I'm going to hit F3, and there we go. So now I can zoom a little bit and get a better picture. And I just want a little divot around the top. So I'll put it right around there and click. And we might need to change the height of this. So I'll go, yep, we need to bring in a little words. All right, and I'll hit F1 again. So now we have a little divot, but it might be too much. So I'm going to bring it in just a little bit right about there. And let's add a little bit more detail. Let's add some text. So a new fill layer, I'm going to turn off color, roughness, and metal, and I'm going to add a black mask. So now I want to find some text. So under alphas, there should be a couple text options. So just look for that real quick. And if you can't find it, there's a filter option right here. I'll click that, and there should be a font option. So I want font Chanthera. I'll click that, and over in the properties, there's a parameters, there's a text option, and you can change it to anything you want. Let's say good. We'll try good for now. We'll say good soda, and I'll put it right here. I'm going to go to my UV, and we'll click right there. Again, you might need to change the height to something where you can visualize it right there. Go back to my mask and type in soda. Right there. So now we have a little bit of text on the top to add a little bit more detail. And last but not least, I want to add a little bit of detail on the bottom too. So again, I want a new fill layer. I only want height and normal. I'm going to add a black mask, and I'm going to close the filters for that. Go back to alphas, and I'm going to type in circle again. And this time, let me look for it real quick. I want circle 01 alpha. And I'm going to go to the UV, the bottom, and we'll see what this looks like. Again, I always forget you need to change the height, otherwise it won't be visible. So I'll go to the fill layer in that, and I'll bring it down just a little bit. So we'll see what it looks like. Bring it down just a little bit more. And I'm not sure if I like that. So what we can do is we can Control Z, or we can also erase it. So we can click on the mask and go to the erase tool, and I'll make it a little bit bigger, and we can just erase it. So we'll try it again. I'll click on the mask, click on the paintbrush, and we'll play around with it. We'll see what we can get. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Let's try that. Mess with the height a little bit. That should be good. All right. So that should be it for the cap and the bottom. But now our soda can is still looking really boring. We need some logos on it. And there's a couple ways to do that, and I'll show you one of them. So let's create a new folder again. I'll minimize that and create a new folder, and I will drag to the top. Minimize it again, and I will call this logo. So now, instead of creating a fill layer, I just want to create a basic layer. I'm going to drag that inside. And now, I don't want an alpha, I want a texture. So I'm going to go to my textures. Right there. And now I want the Coke label. This is something I gave you, but you can also make this yourself. You can go online and cut out a pre-measured label just like this. And all we need to do now in this case is just drag it into our base color. So now we can paint on this, but as you can see, we have like a circle boundary. That's because we still have an alpha selected. So over here, I'm just gonna delete the alpha, and now we can paint on a logo anywhere. But again, it might be a little hard here as it projects a little bit different. So we're gonna do this in the UV. So I'm gonna hit F3, zoom out a little bit, and here we can paint on this area right here to get to the logo. But our logo's in the wrong direction, so we need to rotate our logo. So what we can do is we can go to the properties down here, and under the angle option, we can change the angle. So I want this to be, let's try 90 degrees. That seems to be good. So 90 degrees. Another problem you'll find is when we zoom out or make our brush bigger, it can only go so big. You can also say numbers above 100, like 200, but there's other ways to do that too. So we can go to size space, we can go to viewport, and it'll become a little bit bigger. So now all I want to do is I want to paste this right where I think it would be. I want to cover the area, but not too big. So this will take some custom work. Let's try 98. Oh, not 980. 95. Let's try that. 95. A little bit smaller. This is some trial and error. 92. Try that. Maybe a little too small. It's not covering 93. I'll try that right there. And now we're still having some issues. That's because we have tangent wrap on. So I'm going to Control Z and put that back on UV. So click it again, find a sweet spot, and click. Let's go see what we got. So now we have a cool soda label, but there's some more work to do. Over in the UVs, you can see some of our logo bled over to this. And there's a simple way to fix that. So up here on the logo, let's create another mask. So I'm going to right click it and create a black mask. Now everything's gone, that's because it's black and everything's transparent. So we need to change that. So what we can do is we can essentially paint it on, or we can use the polygon fill tool, which is right up here. So I'm going to click that, and now whenever I select these, we can fill in with our UVs and our UV islands. So if I select this one right here, which is UV chunk fill, I'll click this UV island and it'll fill the whole thing in while leaving everything untouched. There's a couple different options, and right here is our invert value. So right now 1 is fully visible and black is transparent. So say I want this partially visible, I can do that and click, and it'll make it kind of transparent, or I can make it completely gone or completely visible. So I'm noticing one other thing. Our soda can is pretty rough. It's not very shiny like a normal soda can. So in order to fix that, I'm going to go back to my brush tool, and I'm going to go back to my layer. So you would think if you can change the roughness and the metallic, it would change, but as you can see, nothing's happening. That's because we used a layer instead of a fill layer. That's one of the downfalls. So in order to fix that, you can either paste over it or you can erase it. I'm just going to erase it real fast. Alright, and I'll try pasting it again. Click on my brush tool, but this time I only want the color. So no height, roughness, metal, or normal. I want to use the shininess, the metallic, and all the other base information from the base material. So I'll find this sweet spot, I'll paste it, and it already looks a lot better. So I'm going to click on this to hide the logo. I'm going to go to my iron brush material, which is my base. So if I mess with the roughness, it'll change everything. So I'll bring it a little shiny, and it already looks a lot better. Alright, well I think that's all I want to do for the soda can, and let's move on to the crate. So to start working on the crate, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go up here, we're going to click texture set list, and we're going to hide the soda, and we're going to unhide the crate. And we're also going to click on the crate to bring up its layers. I'm going to exit out, create a new folder for our base. I'm going to double click and call this crate base. And I think I want a wood texture, so we'll say wood. And I'm going to delete this. Instead of creating a fill layer, I want to use something that already exists. So down here in my shelf, I'm going to exit out of this shelf, and I want a new material, but we can search for it in the search bar. I want wood, so I'll type in wood, and I want wood beach. So I'm going to drag wood beach all the way up here into this layer, drag it in so it's in, and now we already have a wooden crate, but it looks a little boring and there's a lot more I want to do to it. So at first glance, I'm noticing some of the texture sides, the fibers are going different ways than one another. In this model, I want them all to point up. And the reason they're different are because some of the islands over here are rotated differently. And there's an easy way to fix that. So what I'm going to do is create a couple of masks. So first off, I want to find out what sides are correct and what sides are incorrect. So at first glance, there's only one correct side, which is this side. They're all pointing up. So I want to create a black mask on this guy. And well, everything's gone. So I'll go to my polygon tool again. I want to click on the UV chunk fill, make it sure it's 1, and I want to click. That's good. Click this guy and click this one. It's only going to select the UVs over here. Again, you can select them over here as well. Okay, let's check the top real quick. The top seem to be fine, and the bottom. I really don't care too much about those. Just the other sides. Okay, I just want to see if the outsides are fine. Yep, the outsides seem to be fine too. Check the insides. This inner rim seems to be fine too. So I'll come back to that. That one's fine. That one's fine. So it's really not as bad as I thought. Just a couple of sides. I'll fill that in and fill that in. But now I want to go fix the panels that are incorrect. So I'll click the polygon fill, which is the square, and I want to invert it to 0. So I'm going to hide these things. So I want to hide this one right here, this one because it's going sideways, and this one too. So now we got some white squares. Well, how do we fill that out? Well, we can go over here, and I can hit Control D to duplicate, and now we have the same exact material and mask stacked on top of another. So I want to invert the mask, and we can do that. So I'll right-click the mask, and I want to invert mask. So now it looks like just the way it was. That's because we need to rotate the wood first. So in order to rotate it, I'm going to go to this new layer with the mask that we have that get the affected islands, and I'm going to go down to the wooden material. So this is a smart material, so it has some extra things going on. So in order to find out where the fibers are, I need to go through like wood veins. So I'm going to click on the mask for this, and there's a wood pattern 01. So I want to rotate that. So I'm going to click on that, and I want to rotate it 90 degrees. Let's go see what that did real quick. So real quick, I just want to move it back, and you can see it rotating right there. And that's what we want. So we'll go back to 90 degrees, but there's still some lines going sideways. So let's go check wood fibers. I'll click on the mask again, and there's another wood pattern. So I'm going to click on that, and I'll rotate it 90 degrees. Alright, that looks a lot better. And I'm going to name this, so I'm going to go to the top, minimize that, and I'm going to name this whole top one Crate Base Wood Rotate. Next, I want to add some more detail. I want to add some wooden planks on these sides. So, in order to do that, I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to call this Planks. And I want a new fill layer. So for this, I want a base color of black. And I don't want height, roughness, or metal. Actually, I do want height. And I want the height to be pretty about halfway deep. Okay, so in order to get planks, I want to add another black mask to this fill layer, but first I'm going to move it into the planks folder. So add a black mask to that fill layer, and now we have nothing. So let's make some planks. So in order to do that, I'm going to go make sure I have my paintbrush selected, and go to brushes, and I want it like a basic hard, let's try basic hard brush. So I'm going to hold Shift and Alt, and I want to move it where I can see it just right there. Minimize that. Let's try 0.7. See what that looks like. I click up here and I hold Shift. It's a little thick. Let's try 0.3. Click up here, hold Shift. We got some planks. Don't worry about these overlapping lines. We'll fix that in a bit with a mask. But for now, let's just create some planks. So I click, hold Shift and Control, and go straight line. Click, Shift, and hold Control. Just a couple more times. And that looks pretty good. But now I got all these ugly lines overlapping. So in order to fix that, there's an easy way. So what we can do is up here on Planks, I'll right click it, and create a black mask. So I only want the planks to be on these back inside panels. And there's an easy way to do that. I'll go to the polygon fill tool, make sure it's set to 1, and I want the square. Click it, click that one, this one, that one, and that one. So all the inside square pieces I want these planks on. So if I missed one, that's okay. And if you clicked on another thing by accident, say like right here, I could invert this back to 0 and then click it again and it'll hide it. It'll become black. Alright, so I'll go back to the paintbrush and I'll paint the other sides. Right here, Shift, click, Control. See, like right there, I might have missed it. So let's go see what we did. So up here, this drop-down box, this lets us see different things about our material and our object. So I'm going to base color. There's no shading, it's just our base color. You can see our roughness, our normals, normal height mesh or mask. Oh, normal height mesh, there we go. So you can see like the wood fibers, these are the details being with our normal and our height. and mask is the one we want. So if I move around, you can see the white is the mask that we created, and the black is all the things we don't want visible. So in order to get these to show, I'm going to make sure we're in polygon fill, square selected, and I want to change it to 1. So I'll click there. I'll click down here. I'll double check, make sure all the ones we want are white, and that looks good. So I'll go back to the paintbrush. I'll change the mask back to material, and we will try painting that once more. Alright, let's paint the rest and make sure you are in the actual layer you want to paint on. So fill layer, and I want the black mask. Make sure your brush is selected, and let's try painting again. So I'll click, hold shift, control, click shift control, click shift control, and so on and so forth. And if it doesn't look that pretty, just gonna control Z and try it again. And this can be a little tedious, so I'll just speed through it, but I'm just gonna do this on all other sides. So we're starting to see a lot more detail, but I want to add a bit more. So I'm going to go over here to our layers, create a new layer, not a fill layer. I'm going to right click it and add levels. And I also want to click this drop down right here where it says norm, and I want to click pass through. This is going to help us with some blending. So if I have level selected and down here in the properties, I will have this slider. If I slide it left from the middle, it'll be lighter, and to the right it'll be darker. I just want it to be slightly darker than it was. So right about there. And in order to create the darker planks, I'm going to create a black mask on this layer. First off, let's rename this tint. So on the tint layer, I want to right click it and add a black mask. And I want to have a square alpha for this. So I will go down to the shelf. I will search for all. And I want to find shape. And the shape we're looking for is shape brick. And then over in properties, I want the hardness to be 1. So we can paint this in the 3D, but I want to paint this in the UV. This will be a little bit easier. So what I'm going to do is first make sure the alignment is set to UV, and the size space is set to texture. So I'm going to zoom in and start painting about every other log. Let's try that. So I'll click. And we are going to be bleeding over, but we can use a mask again later on to fix that. So I'll try 3 and paint every other one. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for all these other blanks. Alright, so we have some discolored planks, but as you can see down here, they're bleeding over, and they're bleeding over about just everywhere. So we already have a mask for this, but let's create one for the tint layer. So under tint, I want to create a new folder. I'm going to call this tint container. And then I'm going to drag that entire tint layer into the tint container. But we're going to lose our data. So we got to go over here to the drop down on the folder, click the norm, and it needs to also be a pass through. Alright, so if I right click the tint container, and I want to create a new black mask. And again, we already have a mask for this. So if we scroll down, sometimes they don't show up, but it is the planks layer. So under planks, I want to right click it, the mask, and I want to copy mask. And then I can scroll up to the tint container, click on the mask, right click it, and paste into mask. So now, nothing is bleeding over. But I want to add some roughness to these planks too. So in order to do that, let's go to the tint layer inside the tint container. I want to click on the tint layer itself, and I want to right click it and add levels. So I want to add some height. So in order to do that, I'm going to go to properties, affected channel. I need to change that to height. But in the layers, we're in base color. We need to change the base color to height. We also need to change the linear dodge right here to pass through as well. And make sure one above it is pass through. So now we can change the height. So again, down here in properties, if I zoom in here a little bit, right here, and I scroll left to right, you can see we're getting some change in depth. I just want it ever so slightly different, right about there. I'll bring it in. And I also want to bring down the color a little bit. So let's go back to our color. So up here where it says height, we need to change it to base color. So go back to base color and levels, and I want to bring it down just where it's barely noticeable, probably right there. And change the height a little bit. So back to height and bring it up. All right. That's looking good. So we're still not done yet. So let's create a new layer. Drag to the top. I'm going to minimize these, and I want this to be called dirt. So I want to add some dirt that comes up from the bottom and fades away to the top. There's a couple ways to do this, but I will show you one of the cool ways. So what I want to do, I want to find a dirt material. So in my search bar, I'm going to type in dirt, and I want this guy right here. I'm going to drag him into the dirt folder. And, well, now we have a dirty cube, but this is a little too dirty and not really what I want. So what we can do is we can go into the dirt material itself and mess with it. So in here, under dirt, I want to click in and go deeper. So this dirt mask right here has a mask editor, and this is kind of what we're going to be playing with, but we don't want this mask editor. So underneath the mask editor, we're going to get rid of it. We're just going to go over here and click the X. So what we want to do now is find some kind of smart mask. So if we still have dirt typed into the shelf, we can just drag it down a little bit. And I want this ground dirt smart mask. So I'm going to grab it and drag it all the way to the dirt base and just drop it there. So now we should have some dirt coming in from the bottom. And that looks pretty good, but it's a little too dark for me. So what we can do, we can just minimize this, and this whole dirt folder we can just grab. First, let's make sure we're in base color. We can just click this and drag the visibility down. So if I drag it down, it becomes a little less visible. Right about there seems good. All right, it's looking good. So what I want to do now is add some text. I want a warning fragile text on the top that's kind of worn down. So in order to do that, let's create a new folder. I'm going to call it text. And I want to add a new fill layer. Drag inside the text. I only want the color visible, so no height, roughness, metal, or normal. I want it to be a darker black color. And let's create a black mask on this. So down here in my shelf, with my filter still open, I'm going to go to fonts, and I want this font Black Ops 1. So in the properties under parameters and text, I want to say warning. Let's do caps. So warning. All right, let's go to the top. Right here. Oh, got an eraser. Let's make sure we have the brush on. There we go. Let's type in warning. There we go. And I'll put it right here in the middle. And then we'll type in fragile. And I'll put that right below it. So now I kind of want to wear it down. In order to do that, we can go to the brush and go to the shelf and look for brushes. And you can pick any brush you want, like dirt. But I think I want to pick bark. So I can just start clicking all over and kind of erasing away some of the detail. But I want the flow to be a little bit higher, so it's a little bit harsher. So I'll do that again and just start clicking around and wearing away at it. And I think it looks pretty good. All right. Finally, I just want to add some rivets to the side. So again, create a new folder, drag it to the top. I'm going to rename this rivets. And I want to fill layer, drag it inside. I want only height and normal. I'm going to drag the height down just a little bit, create a black mask. And I'm actually going to use a brush for this, so basic hard. Make sure you have our paintbrush selected. And I'm going to zoom in and just create some little rivets on the corner. So right about here, maybe a little bit deeper. So I'll click on the fill layer and make it a little bit deeper. Back to my mask. For this, we can also use the symmetry feature. So I'll Control Z that real quick. Click on symmetry, click there, snap to the other side, click there, Just going to do it on all the corners. All right. Well, that's looking pretty good. We can add color if you want, just to make it a little bit darker in there. So I'll turn on color, make it a little bit darker. And we can also bring down the visibility of that as well. So I'll click on the actual rivets layer and just bring it down just a little bit. All right, well, the crate is now done and I think it looks great. So we're just about done. We can take a look at exporting these textures to Unity in another tutorial. But for now, let me show you how to save a rendered image of your work. And don't forget to save at this point, as rendering can be a lot harder on a computer. Before we render an image, let's make sure all our objects are visible. So up here, in the texture set list, make sure your coin, your crate, and your soda can are visible. Alright, so I'm going to close this, and in order to get into the renderer, there's this camera icon right here. I'm going to click it, and now we're in the IRA renderer. So in the renderer, there's a couple different options. First off, we can see the grass ground is kind of an eyesore, but we can make that go away. The clear color option right here in the display settings can do just that. So we're going to have a clear gray ground, and you can even change the color. You can also scroll down to adjust the field of view for your camera, focal length, and aperture. And if you want to add some post effects, you can do that as well. So click this box. We can add some vignette, some glare, and options in between. Alright, so we want to render this image. What do? So if we go up here to the spyglass, this is the render settings. Right now it says we're rendering, but we're going to be rendering for 30 seconds. In some cases, it might even be 10 for you. So I'm going to leave it at 10 for now. The lower this is, the easier it is to move around. The higher it is, the longer it's going to render and the harder it's going to be on your computer. So if we want to render an image, we want to render for more than 10 seconds. So I'm going to move it up to, say, 40. And while that's rendering, you can go back down here. I'm going to close out of this, and you can go mess with, wherever they may be, the active post effects. So, lens distortion. Let's do some glare. Turn the luminance down, and I want some vignette. Alright. Go back to your render settings, and it's still not done yet. But when it's done, all you need to do is click the Save Render button. Alright, so it just finished. I'm going to click Save Render. And it's going to ask me to save this as an image file. So I'm going to save it as a JPEG, and I'm going to say texture, practice, image. Here's the final render of our work. You can render it even longer and mess around with other various settings to get an even better result. But for now, that's the end of this tutorial. I hope you learned something, and I'll see you next time.